Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and today I'm in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is, please welcome Paul Thallner, author of Reinventing Resilience. Paul, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And Paul and I did not know this, but we're both from Philadelphia, and he lives there in Philadelphia now. So I had no idea when I booked him that he's actually from my hometown.
Right.
Paul, let's talk. Let's start off by you talking about your professional background.
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to. And even though I'm mourning Mr. Kelsey's departure from the Eagles, I can pull myself together for this conversation. So
Yeah,
for
I'm
my
sad
ba-
too.
yeah. So my background is I guess you could summarize my career as having solved people problems in organizations, right? So that's been the kind of the domain of my professional experience. I'm currently CEO of High Peaks Group, which is a talent optimization company. And prior to that, I was a principal consultant at Daggerwing Group and a partner at Great Place to Work, which is the organization most people know as the company that creates the Fortune magazine 100 Best Places to Work list. And earlier in my career, I worked on public policy. I was a teacher, an English teacher in Slovakia during its first year following its peaceful separation from Czechia, and so many other, fun professional experiences that we could dive into. But that, in a nutshell, it's solving people problems for organizations.
So, why did you write this book?
So, Reinventing Resilience is a project that started when I saw the statistic from Jeffrey Pfeffer's book, Dying for a Paycheck, where he said that the workplace is the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. Since then, I started digging into that. The World Health Organization has declared workplace stress a global health epidemic. And the economic impact of workplace stress is astronomical. It's in the tens of billions of dollars a year. And stress really comes from the way we've chosen to set up our organizations. It's a structural problem. But over and over again, business either ignores it or tries to fix the people and not the underlying systemic causes of workplace stress. So, my book, Reinventing Resilience, seeks to raise awareness and offer a path forward.
And what's your definition of resilience?
Yeah, it's interesting. In writing the book, I discovered a number of really interesting takes on resilience, and none of them really satisfied me. So I had to come up with my own definition. Like, I found that, there's a lot of folks who talk about resilience as the ability to withstand a blow. So, like, for example, creating a resilient organization that has computer systems that can survive an attack. Another was about long-term sustainability or environmental viability, like creating solar or wind-powered infrastructure instead of using finite fossil fuels. A lot other people talk about grit and determination, like sports figures, team performance and things like that. But the most common definition, of course, is getting up after being knocked down. And even that really implies that you have to be knocked down first in order to be resilient. So I was looking for a new definition that would apply to organizations. And through a lot of research and help from some really smart people, I concluded that resilience wasn't really about going through something, it was about growing through something. So my definition of resilience is the courage and confidence to grow through challenges.
I think that's actually an excellent definition for resilience, because anybody who's an entrepreneur knows that's exactly what we go through. Your model for resilience has five parts. Can you please talk about them?
Yeah, sure. If it's okay, I'm going to share my screen so we
Yeah,
can look at it together.
sounds
Uh,
good.
okay, so here it is. So first of all, my model applies to individuals as well as organizations. It scales, and it's really designed as a framework for building resilience. So I'll talk in terms of organizations, but so an organization builds resilience when it has a strong core that consists of keen awareness of its internal and external environments and the forces acting on them, which I call staunch realism, as well as a strong shared belief in that the organization will survive and thrive regardless of the challenges that it's facing. And I call that collective efficacy. So together, having awareness and belief creates courage to face the organizational blockers and the complexity of the situation that you see over there on the left hand side of the model. But it also creates organizational confidence to access resources and discover new practical possibilities. That's the area you see on the right hand side of the model. And what I love about the model is that you can actually build resilience from the inside out or from the outside in. So, in either direction, an organization can build the courage and confidence they need to grow through challenges.
How long did it take you to put that model together?
I think it's been percolating for a while, but and this was definitely a project that came through the pandemic, but probably about 18 months.
What are the qualities which you mentioned in the book resilient people typically have?
Yeah. So believing in one's own ability, which is self-efficacy, like at their core, resilient people do believe that they can get through a challenge, even if the way through it is difficult. So they don't have like a crushing sense of hopelessness. There is a glimmer that they can make it through. Another is seeing the context really clearly and unflinchingly. And by that, that staunch realism thing, uh, it's resilient people don't tend to fool themselves or wear rose-colored glasses. They really focus on the facts, the data, the truth, while avoiding wishful thinking. Um, Another thing is they understand their fears and triggers. So resilient people tend to have at least some awareness of the things that trigger them, even if they can't name them. They can objectively see them and control their responses a bit better than most. They also accept the situation for what it really is. They can see a situation, and even if it's really painful, they can look at it, and they tend to stay present with the present. And then, they also choose from a filtered set of reasonable possibilities. And this is a little bit of an interesting one because, resilient people choose a way forward, but they pick among several very practical possibilities. They don't jump out of the frying pan and into the fire typically. Even if all the choices are poor, they pick one that they can live with. And then lastly, resilient people tend to access hidden resources and really good at finding them. So they don't treat a challenge as if it's their first time ever. They draw upon their full range of resources that they have at their disposal to really help them move forward. And even if those resources are hidden or not very frequently accessed, for example, if we can forget or downplay, some of our qualities, our values, maybe some of our skills, some of the knowledge we've acquired along the way, especially when we're experiencing a significant challenge. But resilient people tend to have some incredible ability to access those things when they need them the most.
Today in Vietnam, it's Women's Day, and so we celebrate all the contributions women make. Uh, it seems to me, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me women are more resilient than men. Is there any studies that basically look at that? Because even when I see women entrepreneurs and even women athletes, they can be beaten down, but they can't be taken out. They just seem to come back. And I wonder, is that because, there's a maternalistic instinct that makes them fight even harder than men do? Because my view of seeing that, even especially women entrepreneurs, that it's really almost like impossible to kill them, that they just keep coming forward. So is there
Yeah,
any studies on that type of thing?
yeah, I didn't explore that path, although it's really fascinating to me. My mom was an inspiration for this book. When we were growing up, she was a single mom of four kids, and I'm the youngest of four kids, and she got a job working at 3 Mile Island, which many know is the site
I
of
remember
America's,
that.
yeah, worst nuclear disaster. And she worked on a team of all men, and it was a really difficult, challenging, some might argue toxic, I would argue toxic workplace. And she would come home really defeated and deflated a lot, and would be tired, sad, upset. and that would ripple through our family a lot. And but she worked there 13 years and did it because she knew that she could provide for us in that way. And whether that's, stubbornness or resilience or perseverance or grit or all of those things together, I don't know. And I don't know whether, uh, she's, as a woman, is more resilient than anyone else, but I certainly do appreciate and respect that a lot. And there are a lot of really great examples of women leaders who demonstrate resilience every day.
Women in Vietnam are totally equal to men. There's no glass ceiling. There's tons and tons of women CEOs running all sizes of companies. One of the ladies I work with, both her mom and dad were majors in special forces, and she says, Guess which one is the true badass?" Uh, and so you see that kind of, yeah, equanimity here. I'm wondering, are cultures in various parts of the world more resilient than others?
Yeah, I think that, any culture can make a claim, right, that they're resilient. Every culture has its stories of growing through challenges, and I think embedded in that question is really this idea of the inherent fragility or strength that determines resilience. And I don't necessarily see it that way. I kind of think that, everything has a life cycle, and regardless of resilience, everything that has a life cycle has an end of life cycle. So in the book, I talk about Pando, which is the largest and oldest living organism on Earth. And it's this sprawling stand of quaking aspen trees, 106 acres actually. And these trees grow in what are called clonal colonies, which means they not only share a root network, but they share the same DNA, which means every tree is, that's connected to this root network is essentially part of the same organism. And it's been around for 14,000 years. So it's seen a lot and survived a lot more threats than any other living thing. So I hope our human culture continues to evolve in a way that enables it to thrive for a long time, the same way Pando has for all these years.
Um, in America, my generation, I'm 63. God, I hate to even mention that number, 63. Used to give every child a trophy for participation so they wouldn't have bad self-image. Is it wrong not to let children fail and not dust themselves off to learn how to handle failure and become resilient?
Yeah, I have a son, and when he was really, really little, we met a lot of parents in play groups, on the playground, daycare, etc. And we learned pretty quickly that, like us, parents were kind of winging it and doing the best they can. So I think, rather than trying to say, you know, instead of um, going that direction, I'm maybe thinking like in regardless of the value system a parent had, I think kids found a way to fail, rebound, and learn and grow. I think, regardless of the surrounding, societal norms around them, I think every kid does have those opportunities to fail and learn and grow. And I think, as we all know, that process finds us in life, no matter how hard we try to avoid it. So sooner or later, kids are going to, or people are going to learn those lessons.
Yeah, I remember I didn't pick my daughter for the All-Star team, and she said, "Dad, you're the only parent that didn't pick your kid from the All-Star team." And I said, "Were you better than the three kids that I did pick?" "Well, no." "Well," I said, "now you know." And she said it actually helped her through life, knowing that things weren't just going to be handed to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In the beginning of the book, you went through a very scary moment hiking the Grand Canyon. Can you talk about that and what you learned from it?
Yeah, having flashbacks. Sure, it was 2017, and my brother-in-law had just died in a paragliding accident, so I was still coping with this loss. And I went to the Grand Canyon on a 7-day leadership experience where we hiked and camped below the rim. And the canyon, as anyone knows who's been there, is vast. And the environment there is absolutely unforgiving. Uh, so on the third or fourth day, our hike took us to a stretch where we walked right on the edge of a chasm, and there was no way around it, right? So to the left was this 600-foot drop, and to the right was the steep canyon wall, like literally rubbing against my shoulder. So with just a 1-foot path to get through, it was really just terrifying. So the combination of grief and fear kicked in, and I just froze. I just literally could not move. Um, the good news is the guide who we were with saw me and came over to help. He very calmly said to me, "Look, this is not a problem. This happens a lot at this part of the trail. Everyone gets through it just fine, and you will too, and I'll help you." And it just really put things in perspective. It really did kind of begin the process of helping me get over my hijacked brain. So I eventually found the courage to start shuffling forward. And with each little step, I gained a little more confidence. And soon I was able to get through it. It was like several hundred yards of this. It was not a small little piece of trail. So, but what was remarkable was the change inside me that resulted. Like I felt like a completely different person afterwards, and I felt better prepared both mentally and physically for the rest of the trip. So, and it did shape how I think about resilience. It was, way more than just getting through it. It was about the growth that I experienced.
Um, what is misunderstood about developing skill to be resilient?
Yeah, I think most of us believe that resilience itself is a skill, but I think it's more accurate to say that it's a quality that comes from the mastery of a number of skills. So, for instance, self-awareness helps you understand your emotional response to stress and what tends to trigger a response. So, knowing that in advance can really help you see it coming when it's coming. Another is building self-discipline around objectively evaluating a situation. That helps you kind of create, boundaries within which to see realistic solutions. So I think there's a number of different ways people tend to think about resilience versus how it actually plays out in reality.
Why did you write that resilient people have the courage to recognize when they feel triggered or to face their triggered self? And you started to talk about that in the beginning.
Yeah, I did. So I think we've all had one of those moments where we were, like let's say you get cut off in traffic, or someone says something behind your back and you're just like completely overwhelmed with emotion, right? You feel like your response is happening before you can actually think about how you want to respond, right? So we can get triggered in these ways a lot of times. And when that happens, sometimes our behavior can be, maybe not so great, maybe regrettable, or at least misaligned with who we think we are or who we want to be, right? So, like if I get cut off in traffic on my best days, I'm like, oh, just that's that guy's being a jerk. On my worst days, I'm like letting off a string of, profanity, and like feeling the need to like beep at the person or tailgate or something worse, right? So that's a triggered response. So it's just out of sync with how I want to be as a person, and out of sync with the way others expect us to be, right? So facing those moments when we aren't ourselves or we're not at our best really does take courage. So like for us to admit that, for us to look at that and kind of evaluate it, understand it, and try to do it differently next time, it requires a little bit of reflection and sort of honesty with ourselves, and that requires some courage. So resilient people have developed strategies and approaches to acknowledge their triggers and to respond well to them. I mean, there's lots of work that, those who study emotional intelligence, there's tons and tons of reflective exercises where people can do work to get a little bit closer to understanding when those moments happen. And I think doing that work is really important.
You talked about this early, and we see this all the time, right? Companies are getting beat up. There's been a bit down in the market in terms of the economy, especially here in Vietnam. We see this, and we've seen with companies like Twitter, X, who have let go of 80% of the workforce. What are the keys to building workplace resilience?
Yeah, um, there are a number of them, and I think there are. a lot of things that are focused on the leadership and systems and practices and the underlying structures of the organization. But at the core, there are three that I would like to talk a little bit about. So one is beginning to even acknowledge and address that the systems and the practices and policies are actually the cause, and they act as organizational headwinds, right? So building resilience means recognizing that, hey, our, let's say our performance management system is a performative act that essentially punishes people, right? So if you acknowledge that, you're taking a look at some of the systems that causes people to be extremely maybe stressed out, less productive, less engaged, more willing to look elsewhere for work, etc., right? So acknowledging that that it's our practices, it's our systems, and some of these other things internally that can act as headwinds is one of the keys. The second is taking a strengths based approach. Now, you know, I think taking a step back and recognizing that your organization did not get to where it is by accident is healthy, right? So there's some inherent resilience already in place, right? So and becoming resilient is about strengthening what's already there. So we don't, you don't start with the premise that we are not resilient and we have to become resilient. It's a matter of understanding that you already have been, and it's about strengthening it. And then the last key, I think, is thinking bigger, right? So building workplace resilience is about a lot more than simply filling it with resilient people, right? That just doesn't work. So, we're under this false belief that if we just make every individual resilient, the organization will then become resilient by association or by default. And that just doesn't work that way. So people have to work together towards a common purpose in a system that treats them like humans. I think when that happens, it's all upside for the organization.
Um, what is, as you mentioned, deficit-based resilience?
Yeah. Okay. So that's all about thinking that resilience is just about closing the gap that arises between the time you got knocked down and the time you get back up. Right. And the problem with that thinking is that if you're always thinking about getting back to the point where you got knocked down, you're not thinking about moving forward past that point, right? You're not thinking about growth. So your mind stays in this place, this deficit orientation, focused on this kind of negative space, like the deficit of where you were before to where you are now, which is backwards. So, the progress is really just to get back to zero. And I think that in and of itself is just a deficit model or a deficit mindset that leaves a lot on the table for people. So I think there is the other side of resilience, which is growth, growing through a challenge as opposed to going through a challenge.
But that's a kind of a mindset thing, right? About how you look at it.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. And that's what I've discovered along the way with resilience is that we talk about half of it. We're only talking about sort of that knockdown part. Well, we don't talk about the what happens after you dust yourself off and take a look at where do we go from here, right? No, we don't. We just don't talk about it that often in the context of resilience. So I think we have to have a more complete view of what resilience is, and that's why when I started thinking about that, that's when I started realizing that resilience scales from the individual up to the organizational level.
I'm amazed, especially people who come overcome um, where they've taken a physical beating in some sport and they managed to come back. And Holly Holm was a MMA fighter and was a world champion boxer. Um, got the crap kicked out of her by a fighter in France and knocked out in 8 rounds. But I mean, really got pummeled. But 6 months later, she came back and beat that same one. What kind of mental toughness do you need, especially physically, when somebody physically beats you into the ground? Most people would be broken by that. And I wonder what kind of resilience training or how did she manage to be able to overcome something? I never saw anything like it.
Yeah. Well, um, it's dramatic to see someone's face beat up like that and then them talking about it as if that's their job. And I think that's what we see. But I think thinking about this person as like, well, this is her work, this her workplace is the ring, or that, and that's just what they do, what this person does. So of course that's part of what happens when you engage in this occupation. So it's not so much about taking a beating as it is about, what did I learn from that experience and how am I going to not let it happen again? So I think that's the part that we always forget about when we talk about resilience. It's very it we focus on the very spectacular fails or falls or bloody faces and things like that, but the real learning happens after, as a result of processing what happened, understanding where things could have been differently, understanding that I, I'm a good fighter, I can do this, I've done it before, that was an anomaly, I'm going to go back and do it again and not make the same mistakes.
And do you think somebody like her went through a psychologist that worked with her on developing these kind of skill set?
I don't know. I mean, I think sports psychology is pretty fascinating. Um, and I think there's a lot of applicability to sports psychology to the business world because, my understanding of sports psychology is it's about getting out of your own way and just releasing yourself from kind of thoughts that could prevent you from performing at a high level. And I collectively, when organizations are able to do that, which is kind of a lot of what I talk about in my model, is really just sort of staunch realism, right? The awareness of the situation and understanding it for what it truly is. I think that's when you can find a lot of organizations becoming really resilient. So yeah, I mean, I would hope they did. I mean, I would think a lot of the best athletes do that, so they can get out of their own way. And I think
Yeah,
organizations
they
can
say it's
influence it.
80% mental, and I think that's for everything in life is 80% mental.
Yeah.
How does the reinvent resilience model work?
Yeah, I'm a literature major at heart, and I love metaphors, and I kind of think in metaphors. So I have a metaphor for this question, and so I think the best way to describe it is like an estuary, right? An estuary is a really special ecosystem where the salt water from the ocean and the fresh water from a river meet to form a unique habitat. And the water in this habitat is neither salt water nor fresh water. It's brackish water. It has its own name, right? And what's cool about estuaries is that the tidal flows change the water constantly. And the wildlife that inhabits estuaries have learned to survive in both salt and fresh water. I mean, the blue crabs of Maryland, I mean, not too far from where we both live or we're from, um, can have different stages of their life cycle in the freshwater versus the saltwater versus the brackish water. It's fascinating. The resilience model is similar. It's comprised of two forces that join together to create one ecosystem: staunch realism and collective efficacy, which I mentioned earlier. They're at the center of organizational resilience, and in my model, they join to provide organizations with courage and confidence.
GE once was the most valuable company in the world. If you worked for GE, you were proud and successful, but that's changed over the last decade. The mood of the employees has to be dark and disappointed, especially for people who've been around during the Jack Welch era heyday. How does a culture bounce back and maybe set a new course for the company? Apple did under Jobs on 2.0. I mean, they were down and out, and Bill Gates had to kind of bail them out, or they were going to be declared a monopoly. So,
Yeah.
how does a company bounce back from that kind of fall from grace?
Yeah, and there are a lot of stories where that didn't happen too, right? So, but what I think is common among them, and just looking again through my biased resilience perspective here, is that there's really three elements. One is leadership, right? And not just any leadership, or not just having a strong, dictatorial leader. I think Steve Jobs was widely known as being pretty uh, um, you know, pretty firm in his beliefs about stuff. But what he was also, I think, more importantly, was he was honest, right? He told the truth. He was pretty vulnerable in that regard. We're saying like exactly what was going on with the organization, exactly where things weren't going well, exactly where things were going well, and I think just the ability to sort of lay it out there for people and have them understand the situation really well and make decisions that affect them at their desks was one of the keys to turning that organization around. Another is related, which is being transparent, right? So this is related to conveying the full story to everybody. So this awareness, right? So being transparent about what's going on, and not trying to sugarcoat things or spin things or run it through your communications people to sort of like soft pedal it or take the hard edges off. It's really being transparent and honest and open about the organization and what it's going through and what are the realities in the marketplace and things like that. And then the third is belief, right? So sharing stories, connecting back to the successes of the organization, like we talked about. Organizations don't happen by accident. They happen, they stumble forward one success and one failure at a time. And offering up those stories and perspectives really can begin the process of helping people understand that it's possible, that this could definitely be different. This could change. There's hope. I'm going to stick around another day. Let's see what happens. And over the course of time, people start to, believe it. They, then they manifest it. Then more people believe it. Then it becomes the story, right? And it takes time, but leadership, awareness, and belief, I think, are the three things that make the difference.
Do you believe in manifesting?
Well, yes and no. I I'm not a big fan of the phrase "fake it till you make it." I think that's a little bit too simple. But I do think you have to be honest with people the about what's really going on. So I don't think you just sort of like, if you dream it, you can be it. Yeah, I think that's somewhat true, but I think you also have to be pragmatic and honest and truthful about things. So yeah, a little bit, I guess, but not 100%.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I believe even if I wanted to play in a Grand Slam event in tennis, there's no way it's going to happen. I just don't have the talent to go and make that happen.
I
I can
use that
manifest
example
it
all
all
the
I
time.
want.
I was a tennis player in my youth too, and if I dress in the tennis outfit, doesn't mean I'm going to win Wimbledon, you know.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Are there industries more soul crushing than others, or is it dependent on the culture of the organization itself? Because my younger daughter works in Hollywood, and I can't think of an industry outside the military, fire, police, that need more resiliency skills.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question because of the time we're living in right now, right? Because if you're on, Instagram or Reddit or anywhere online, you would think that anything at all to do with work is soul crushing, right? Because people are just
Yeah.
so fed up with the system, the structure, the man, whatever you want to call it, that you would think that they're all bad, none worse than any other. But I think whether an industry or company is soul crushing really has to do with the social construct that's offered and agreed to, right? Or the social contract that's offered and agreed to, right? So we spend a lot of time trying to understand and play by the unwritten rules of an industry or a company, right? So in Hollywood, there's specific rules around, you're going to get a low wage or no wage job to earn your way in and get credibility or whatever, blah blah blah. All those rules that are unwritten, that we all kind of struggle to understand or try to figure out or learn the hard way. They ultimately are really challenging, and we spend a lot of time doing those things, uh, instead of trying to fix the problem that they ultimately represent, right? So I think it's time, in my opinion, it's time for leaders to really truly lead and create workplaces that lengthen life rather than shorten it. I mean, I think that would be a great thing for both of our kids, Mark, don't you think?
Oh, without question. And I think our kids are expecting that from leaders today, that they are thinking about those things. I mean, my oldest has her own global communications company, and she's killing it, but she thinks about work-life balance every day. And she said, come Friday, by the evening, we're ready to shut down. I'm not picking it up till Monday morning because I don't
Yeah.
want my life dominated by work. And there are organizations, especially in Asia, where they have people working on Saturdays, and then sometimes it extends to Sundays. And then they wonder, why is there such big turnover here that people are leaving? Because the people are like, it's, sucking the life out of me. And I'd rather be without a job and no income, because something will come up, then go and continue with this, which should be a wake-up call to companies, right?
Yeah, well, I think it is definitely a wake up call, and I think some companies are trying to figure it out, and a lot of them are trying to do the shortest, easiest solution they can find, as opposed to really taking a hard look at the underlying reasons why people are leaving, right? So they'll say, well, look, we're going to have a wellness program in the office to make you feel better, and we're going to assume and expect that that's going to take care of the problem and make you love this place now. That just doesn't work that way, right? You can't yoga your way out of this. You have to look at the you know, you have to look at the organization and what it's creating inside the, with it, within its people and within the teams, and really commit to doing it differently. That doesn't mean have lower expectations or you know change your strategic objectives or anything like that. But I think it's really just, it's about understanding the people who are coming to you and want to work there, and being really really explicit and clear about what's expected. And then when people get tired, have a plan.
You think it's a mistake for organizations to consistently ask people what is wrong? Why do you have a problem with that?
um, so my background is in positive psychology, positive organizational change. We talked for a minute about some of that before we got on the live call. I don't necessarily have a problem with asking what's wrong, but I do have a problem with that being the only question. And it's what organizations are really, really good at. And most organizations, that's all they do. They look for problems and then they try to solve them. But when we only ask what's wrong or what the problem is, or I think, what kind of answers do we get? Right? We get a long list of things that suck, right? And over time, what happens is that that becomes the narrative, and that's the only thing people see. So therefore, that becomes what people believe. So they're like, this place sucks. All I hear about is how awful it is, and all these long lists of problems that have to be fixed. It seems to never end. Um, it can never fully be fixed because there's always something to fix, and there's always people asking for more things to fix. It's just like, what is wrong? What's wrong with us? Like, why can't we get this right? So we pay the price for that, in the form of higher stress from all the pressure to fix everything all the time. And I think, you know, what would it's and again, I don't think we have to stop asking what's wrong, but I think we have to also ask what's right, what's working, what's going well, where are we awesome, when have we actually been at our best, what can we learn from the things that we did extraordinarily well and that we achieved at. So I think it just provides a balance, and it really does contribute to, the staunch realism that I talked about in my model. um, and I don't think we can become resilient if we fundamentally believe that an organization is beyond repair. And if we only ask what's wrong, that's kind of what we're saying.
This is a question from the audience. Can HR department measure the quality of resilience prior to hiring middle and upper management in dynamic industries? If possible, is it reliable? If a score is low, can the firm teach it, teach resilience?
I'm assuming that question is related to measuring the resilience of individuals before
Yeah,
they're hired. Is that right?
yes.
Um, I don't know of explicit resilience assessments that measure resilience the way I define it. Um, but I think there are some indicators that you can look for, and the ones that come to mind are, emotional intelligence competencies, right? I think those are some of the closest that I would say you could get away with measuring during an interview process. So if someone does the VIA, which is Marty Seligman's assessment at Penn, that could give you some indication. If for instance they come to you with a 360 they've done at a prior organization, that might be helpful. But I think some of those qualities of self-awareness, self-management, organizational awareness, and relationship management, the four big pillars of emotional intelligence, could be one of the main ways to understand a person's ability to kind of withstand some of the headwinds in an organizational structure. But again, I would say don't just hire resilient people, make the organization resilient.
You write that how stress corporate environments focus on the individual, but should focus on the system. You start talking about this a little bit more. What are some of the things that these organizations could absolutely do a lot better that would reduce that stress level?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. In my book, I was doing a lot of research on workplace stress, and it's not new. I trace it back to the 1700s. People started complaining about how stressful workplaces were. So even back then, probably goes further back than that. So this is a historic and enduring challenge that organizations will always have and have always had. So just FYI. But it's on everyone's minds because mental health is such a big topic these days. We're still coming out of the pandemic, and people's idea and understanding and expectations of work have really shifted. And people are still, maybe not so much as much as they were a year ago, but people are still leaving the workforce and opting out of work altogether. Some people are being opted out through layoffs, as many are seeing right now. But the underlying all of that is this kind of belief now that the value people are getting from the workplace is a lot less than the effort that they're putting into it, right? So this, like if you think about work as an exchange of value, like so from an economist perspective, the workers are getting even less of a satisfying return on work than they were getting before, if it ever was satisfactory. But workplaces are really doing this and trying to respond. They're seeing this and trying to respond, but their solutions are often just helping the individual become more resilient, right? So as I was talking before, like a lot of folks are saying, here's a Headspace or Calm app. Here's a stipend you can use for a yoga studio, all those things, and that's, I think, very necessary, very important, and good ultimately for the individuals. But the problem with that approach is that you have people working on becoming more resilient, but then you drop them back into the same workplace that stressed them out in the first place. So the common denominator really isn't the people, it's the organization. So I think working on the system requires leadership, and it requires some wherewithal to challenge the systems and structures that are already in place, and that can be pretty challenging, and it could be something that people are unwilling to do because it's a threat to their careers even.
What are gap closing cycles and why are they important and how are people affected?
Yeah, so I talk about gap closing cycles in this book, but it's they're closely related to what we choose to pay attention to and what questions we ask. So we talked a little bit about that earlier. But so we ask what's wrong all the time, and we end up with long lists of problems. But what happens then is we're in this endless cycle of closing the gaps, right? So between the problem we've identified and whatever this elusive normal state is that we think is important, right? And what happens is we end up feeling, I mean, it can feel futile, right? As the organization is never fixed, and people, end up losing hope, optimism, energy, and it also conflicts with people's achievement orientation that brought them to work in the first place. So I think this, I use gap closing cycles as a way to say, like, we need to think about resilience differently, because there is so much more so much more to resilience than just simply getting up. We have to thrive and move forward and grow through those challenges.
In the book, you write that resilient organizations have profound self belief that they can thrive no matter the challenge. Is that driven by the CEO or the history of overcoming adversity or something else?
Yeah, I think all of the above, right? So the CEO must play a huge, huge role in any kind of organizational transformation, which, would lead to resilience, right? So the psychology of power in groups tells us that we all take our cues from the leader, right? So the leader, if the leader conveys a sense of belief, it's much easier for the organization to start believing. So the CEO can enable people to see all sides of a situation, including the hopeful side. So if they have a, kind of a multifaceted approach, to talk about both the challenges and the possibilities, I think that's really, that can start some positive momentum in an organization. And I think it's really important, especially important when people who are close to the action see all the cracks in the foundation. The frontline workers, the folks who are kind of there where the rubber meets the road, they kind of know the real deal sometimes of the organization, maybe the underlying history, the flaws, the things that could go catastrophically wrong, the bolts that don't get attached to the doors of the planes and things, right?
Yeah.
So um, but if a CEO can offer an alternative narrative, right, um, that really takes up some additional space in people's minds, so that they can see that there is hope, that we are working on this, that there is a way forward. I think it can really start helping. Again, the reflexive action of an organization, however, is to make this a one and done approach or a communications campaign. And I don't think that would work. I think the CEO has to truly embody this and demonstrate it in all of the actions that he or she does in the organization, not just sort of, in the, town halls and things like that, but just in the day to day.
And it's got to be authentic, right?
Absolutely, for sure, for sure.
You mentioned there's a fight, flight, and freeze, but there's a fourth option, appease. When do you use the fourth option? And nobody likes that word appease. It never sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk a little bit about neuroscience in the book as a way to, because earlier in the conversation, we were talking about triggers and what happens when we are faced with a challenge or a crisis sometimes, right? So that's often where the resilience conversation starts, is like, boom, something happened. So when something happens, we end up in one of these modes: fight, flee, freeze. And they're all designed to keep you alive during a significant threat, right? So we've all had experiences where we've felt that, any one of these responses, right? My canyon story is a freeze example. I was paralyzed. But appease is a response meant to de-escalate a situation, so the threatening person or animal or whatever makes a different choice. So they're like, well, I don't want to eat this person. I'm going to go over there and eat that, whatever, cantaloupe or something. Um, so you do something to make the threat do something else. Um, but this may have evolved in humans to survive a threat within tribes during our primitive times and things, during those hierarchical, when hierarchies were starting to form and things like that. But we use it all the time at work, right? It's actually against most of our social rules and occasionally the law if we use any of the other three options at our disposal at work, right? So we can't fight everybody just because we're triggered. that would lead us to not working there anymore. So we're left with peas. It doesn't really feel great, and it does can build up stress in a person as they sort of like kind of erode their values, or maybe sort of not get their way or things like that. But the reason we do it is to live another day.
People, as you write, always pair resiliency with negative experiences, but resiliency can have positive possibilities. Talk about that, please.
Yeah, you know, change is inherently scary, right? And even though it happens all around us all the time, we always seem surprised by it, right? So our favorite coffee shops has closed, right? Oh no, like it's the end of the world. But on the other hand, we create change all the time ourselves, right? We get married, we move from one house to another, we take new jobs, meet new people, all these things. These are change activities that take us out of our comfort zone and into new norms of behavior, new norms of being. Um, so when we talk about resilience, we also think about it in terms of these big, surprising, negative changes that come out of the blue, right? So like stock market crash, housing crisis, all of these things. Like, where did that come from? Oh my gosh, this is terrible. But the reality is, we have a little bit more control than we may think, especially over our own organizations. So I like to think of change as walking from one valley to another, right? So while valleys may seem like low points, they're full of life. They're full of water and warmth and all kinds of. I like the phrase "there's bliss in the abyss." So if
Uh-huh.
we so if we change our relationship with change, change becomes a lot less scary and much more manageable.
Do you embrace it? Kodak, as you mentioned, is a great example of a powerful brand disemboweling itself over poor strategic decisions because of their greed. The film base was crazy lucrative, compared something that could hold thousands of pictures and even higher quality. What can we learn from Kodak's failure?
Kodak, really interesting. The irony of a camera and film company failing to have vision is just fascinating to me. But notwithstanding, there's you know I think we can learn a lot from Kodak. So to keep going with that valley and peak metaphor I was alluding to a little bit earlier, Kodak was really in a valley, right? They were enjoying the valley they were in. It was comfortable. They had the solitude. They were picking wildflowers. They were just loving it in that valley. And that valley was film, right? They were good in that. They knew it back and forward. They were comfortable navigating. They didn't, see any reason to venture outside of that valley. They didn't go over the mountains, stand on top of a hill and look over into the next valley, which would have been digital photography, right? Until someone else was already over there and populating it, right? So I think the lesson here is that they failed the staunch realism test, right? They didn't take time to gain an accurate picture of the reality of the situation around them. Instead, they chose to believe in their old, narrow version of reality. And it cost them, right? So they had the thing they succeeded at was they had a lot of belief and confidence in the reality they were looking at, but unfortunately, it cost them, right? So they were not able to become or kind of uh, respond quickly enough because they were so committed to the reality that they were in.
Yeah, I think they were fooling themselves. I think that they thought, look at these fat margin business. We can cross over anytime. We're Kodak. And they found out, yeah, you just can't cross over anytime you want to. If you're a strong performer and a straight shooter, like the lady Melissa in your book, you wrote about, and people in large organizations often find these kinds of people as threats. How can organizations safeguard itself from losing this type of high performer?
Yeah. I still talk to Melissa, by the way. She's great. Uh, I think when organizations think of and treat people as people, they have a much higher chance of keeping folks like Melissa, right? So the story of Melissa was that she was seen as a threat and given, weak assignments or kind of set up to fail, all this other stuff. But ultimately, Melissa's boss herself was threatened by her boss. And that person was threatened by the business owner who was threatened by the investors, right? So it was all a cascade of threats that kind of led to this experience that Melissa was having in the workplace. I'm all for accountability, but somewhere along that chain, people were projecting their own fear and their own weakness onto the people below them instead of supporting them to perform at a high level. And I think it's actually pretty ironic. So I think that's what organizations can do, is to really, and the individuals who have leadership responsibility in those organizations can really make the distinction between what's my stuff that I need to work on, what's my fear, my hangups, my triggers, my kind of insecurities, my self-limiting beliefs, my imposter syndrome, versus what am I putting on other people. And I think if you can do that, you're going to be in great shape as an organization, or as a functional area within an organization. I think that really does make a big difference. To when you get that out of the way, a leader will look at Melissa differently and say, how can I support you? I'm not threatened by you. I want you to succeed. And because when you succeed, we all succeed. It's just a different conversation.
You write that outputs of collective efficacy and staunch realism are courage and confidence. What if people are so beaten down? How do you help them get their courage and confidence back?
Yeah, well, don't do it alone. That would not be the way to do it. So I think that it has to be a sustained effort by the organization to change for the better, right? So we all know that organizations really do need to tap into everyone in the organization. There's great research by a guy named David Cooper-Ryder at Case Western Reserve University, who talks about engaging the whole system in change. And when you do that, you like tap into the collective energy of the organization and really mobilize it to move in a specific direction. And that can be very, very powerful when you do that, as opposed to doing it person by person, retail by retail, one-on-one by one-on-one, or performance evaluation after performance evaluation. That could take forever. But if you can galvanize everybody together, tap into the collective momentum or collective energy of the organization to create momentum, I think you can really kickstart some courage and confidence in an organization. However, the devil is in the follow through, right? So making sure that leaders are committed over the long term to really listen to their people, consistently apply the learning that their people are telling them, and really make this a priority over a long period of time. That's how you build trust in an organization, and have organizations get their courage and confidence back.
Here's my last question for you. Are there exercises you recommend making people more resilient?
Yes, I love this one. Here's one that everybody can do. And this can be you as an individual or with your team. So I recommend getting a big piece of paper and doing a timeline of your life. And that could be your life or the organization's life. Draw a line across the piece of paper, and on the left-hand side is the beginning, and on the right-hand side of that line is today. And then go through an exercise where everything above the line, you write down all of the major milestones in your life or the company's history that were positive, fateful, energizing, good. Those moments where you or your company were at their absolute best, really thriving and firing on all cylinders, and fill that up with all of those. You can do it with post-it notes. It'd be amazing. And then below the line, write down all those major negative milestones, moments that caused you to really reevaluate the tragedies, the sadness, the missed opportunities, the setbacks, or the f-ups, or whatever it is you want to include in those below the line moments. And then take a step back and look at it all. So now look at yourself. You're here, right? You're a fully functioning adult person who's been through all of that stuff, right? And you're here, you're standing there, right? Capable. Ask yourself, what patterns are emerging from that timeline that show that you already have the courage and confidence to grow through challenges. And I think you'll find a really interesting conversation there.
Paul, thanks so much. It was a very quick hour. Thoroughly enjoyed the book, And I
Thank
think
you.
especially today with the high stress level people are under, we greatly appreciate you taking the time and talk about your book, and glad you wrote this book, and hope that you will see other books that you're going to write.
Thank you so much. And here's what it looks like for anyone looking for it online. It's like a gorgeous green and blue cover. Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and especially from Philadelphia.
Cheers.
Everyone, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Friday.
Take care.
Thank you.